Have you ever wondered why there are no pictures of the Prophet Muhammad? A question that might seem simple, yet it opens the door to a complex world of religious beliefs and practices. This is a journey into the concept of aniconism, the practice of avoiding or prohibiting the use of images or icons, especially in religious contexts. It's a tradition that has roots in various cultures, from the ancient Greeks who once feared that statues might come to life, to the Jewish prohibition against graven images. But its most significant prevalence is found in the Islamic culture. Aniconism in Islam is not merely an avoidance, it is a prohibition. This prohibition, however, is not about suppressing art or creativity. It's about a deeper, more profound belief system that seeks to prevent any form of idol worship. Islam emphasizes the oneness of God, an entity beyond human comprehension, beyond our limited visual capacity. To depict God or any of his prophets, including the Prophet Muhammad, in any form, would be to limit the limitless, to confine the infinite within our finite understanding. This belief extends to the depiction of the Prophet Muhammad. He is revered, loved, and followed, but he is not to be idolized or worshipped. To create an image of him could risk falling into a form of idolatry, of attributing divine status to a human being. This is a line that Islam, in its strict monotheism, is careful not to cross. Yet this is not merely a rule, a prohibition for the sake of prohibition. It is a concept deeply embedded within the philosophy of Islam, a philosophy that emphasizes the spiritual over the physical, the essence over the form. So the absence of images of the Prophet Muhammad is not a void, but a space filled with profound respect and reverence, a space where the spiritual takes precedence, where the essence of the Prophet's teachings is prioritized over his physical depiction. This prohibition has roots deeply embedded in Islamic philosophy and history. So the next time you notice the lack of images, remember, it's not about what's missing, but about what's being emphasized. To further understand this prohibition, we must delve into the annals of history. The birth of Islam in the 7th century brought about a significant shift in religious and cultural practices in the Arabian Peninsula. At the heart of this shift was the Prophet Muhammad, who preached a radical message for his time: monotheism, the belief in one God, Allah. This was in stark contrast to the prevalent polytheistic practices of the Arab society at the time, where idol worship was a common ritual. The Prophet Muhammad was uncompromising in his teachings against idol worship. He emphasized that God was not to be represented in any physical form, as this could lead to idolatry. He taught his followers to worship God directly, without any intermediary. This teaching is known as Tawhid, the oneness of God, and is one of the core tenets of Islam. This strong stance against idol worship was not without reason. The Prophet was aware of the dangers that idolatry could bring, such as the risk of associating partners with God, which is considered a grave sin in Islam. He sought to prevent his followers from falling into this trap by strictly prohibiting any physical representation of God, including images or statues. Over time, this prohibition was extended to include the Prophet Muhammad himself. This was to prevent his followers from venerating his image, which could lead to idol worship. It was a precautionary measure to safeguard the purity of monotheistic worship in Islam. This historical context provides us with a clearer understanding of why there are no pictures of the Prophet Muhammad in Islam. It is not merely a random prohibition, but a deeply rooted principle aimed at preserving the monotheistic nature of the religion, preventing idol worship, and maintaining the focus of worship solely on Allah. The foundation of this prohibition lies in the Prophet's teachings. The prohibition did not remain static, but rather evolved over time. As with all things, the prohibition on creating images of the Prophet Muhammad saw periods of adaptation and change. Let's journey back to the eras of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, which spanned from the 7th to the 13th centuries. During these periods, depictions of the Prophet, while still rare, were not entirely unheard of. However, they were often abstract and non-representational. The artists of these eras engaged in a delicate dance of artistic expression and religious observance, creating works that suggested the Prophet's presence without directly portraying him. For instance, during the Umayyad period, artists would sometimes depict the Prophet as a flame, a symbol of divine light. This abstract representation allowed artists to honor the Prophet without contravening the prohibition against creating his likeness. As we move forward into the Abbasid period, we see a shift in the artistic representation of the Prophet. The abstract depictions of the Umayyad period gave way to more figurative ones. However, these depictions were still far from literal. Artists would often portray the prophet with his face veiled or his back turned, maintaining a level of ambiguity that respected the prohibition. Throughout these periods, the depictions of the prophet were typically confined to private spaces hidden away from the public eye. This was a measure taken to prevent the images from becoming objects of worship, which would contravene the Islamic principle of monotheism. In the centuries that followed, the prohibition became more stringent. The rise of the Orthodox Sunni and Shia Islam led to a more rigorous enforcement of the prohibition, with many scholars arguing that any form of depiction, even if abstract or non-representational, was unacceptable. Despite some periods of leniency, the prohibition has largely remained intact. Today, the prohibition is widely upheld within the Muslim community, and the Prophet Muhammad continues to be revered through words and deeds, rather than images. In the modern world, interpretations of this prohibition vary. It's fascinating to see how the prohibition against creating images of the Prophet Muhammad is understood and applied differently across the diverse spectrum of Muslim communities worldwide. Some adhere strictly to the tradition of aniconism, maintaining the belief that any depiction of the Prophet, whether positive or negative, could potentially lead to idolatry. They argue that the Prophet's true essence cannot be captured in a mere image, and any attempts to do so may detract from the spiritual reverence accorded to him. This belief is particularly prevalent in Salafi communities and other conservative sects. On the other hand, there are Muslim communities, often of the more liberal persuasion, that interpret the prohibition with a degree of flexibility. They argue that the intent behind the creation of the image matters more than the act itself. For them, depictions of the Prophet Muhammad created with respect and reverence are not only permissible, but can also serve as a means of fostering love and admiration for the Prophet. In recent years, controversies surrounding depictions of the Prophet Muhammad have made global headlines. These instances have sparked intense debates about freedom of speech and respect for religious beliefs. Critics argue that absolute freedom of speech should not extend to offensive depictions of revered religious figures, while proponents maintain that such freedom is vital to a democratic society. The tension between these viewpoints is further complicated by the fact that the prohibition is not universally accepted among all Muslims. The diversity of interpretations adds layers of complexity to the discourse, making it a nuanced and multifaceted issue. It's crucial to remember that these interpretations are not static. They evolve and adapt in response to changing societal norms and cultural contexts. As societies become more interconnected and diverse, these interpretations continue to be debated, re-evaluated, and redefined. The prohibition continues to be a contentious issue in contemporary discourse. It's a fascinating exploration of how religious traditions interact with modern societal values, and it's a conversation that's likely to continue for years to come. This prohibition has had a profound impact on Islamic art and culture. Let's delve into the realms of Islamic art. In the absence of human and animal imagery, art in Islamic culture evolved in unique and fascinating ways. One of the most notable developments is the art of calligraphy. With the written word already holding a sacred place in Islamic culture, calligraphy became a revered form of artistic expression. It's more than merely writing. It's a dance of the pen on paper, creating a visual symphony of letters and words, conveying messages of faith, philosophy, and love. This art form has stood the test of time, adorning mosques and manuscripts, infusing beauty into the everyday life of the Islamic world. Now let's turn our attention to geometric patterns. In the absence of figurative art, geometry stepped in to fill the void, creating intricate designs that are a testament to the Islamic appreciation for symmetry and order in the universe. These patterns, with their repeating motifs and rhythmic flow, create a sense of infinity, reflecting the Islamic belief in the infinite nature of God. It's a silent poetry, resonating in mosques, homes, and even in the humblest of objects. The prohibition has also had a significant impact on the Islamic worldview. It underscores the belief in the oneness of God, a concept central to Islamic theology. By shunning images, it emphasizes the transcendental nature of the divine, an entity beyond human comprehension and representation. It's a constant reminder of the divine mystery, of the unseen yet ever-present. But it's not just about theology. This prohibition has also influenced social norms and behaviors. It's fostered a culture that values modesty, humility, and the inner spiritual life over external appearances. It's a philosophy that has seeped into everyday life, shaping the Islamic way of thinking, living, and viewing the world. Though a prohibition, it has shaped a unique and beautiful expression of art and devotion.